Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this talk. My name is David Evans. I work at Microsoft as a Senior Manager of Customer Research. What I want to talk with you about for the next 20 minutes is some of the work that we've been doing to understand better how brand perceptions are formed and largely what kinds of experiences are encoded into long-term memory and have the ability then to affect how people talk about brands, how they perceive them, their decisions about whether or not to continue being a customer or to recommend it to others. So let me tell you a little bit about this journey that myself with Mistel Taylor here at Microsoft have been on. And it sort of started from a desire, to make sure we're measuring the right things. My group tracks over 20 Microsoft brands, doing things like you might expect, the funnel, perceptions, and so forth. But as we sort of dug into our data and that data of Interbrand, we see sort of here on the left that overall with global brands, Microsoft occupies a very privileged position. As of this year, we've gone up to the number 3 top global brand. And yet at the same time, Interbrand has looked at a different metric, which would be the top customer experience brands, like what you see on the right. And in that measurement, Microsoft is much further back in the pack. And so this kind of indicates to us an area of opportunity, an area where we can understand better how we can improve our customer experience. What can we learn from the people at the top of that list, like Disney, Hilton, and others? And when we started to look into it, we decided that, improving our customer experience would have to reconcile itself against a cognitive bias that I brought to the team to think about, something that Daniel Kahneman talked about in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And really, here's the big idea in this. What he points out is that most of our experiences are, in fact, not encoded in memory. And anything that even more frictionlessly helps us to attain our goals might still not rise to the level of something that we remember for later. We might appreciate that we're achieving our goals in a more frictionless way, but at the same time, it might not stick with us. We might not remember it simply because we don't have to. And so what he talks about as being the experiences that are remembered are peaks, pits, and endings. And so those moments of elevation, either the best moments or the worst moments, and we'll unpack that more later. The big idea for us in UX design is that we are very focused on goal attainment, and we do need to stay focused on that, but it might not actually be enough to leave our users with an improved sense of our brand, with things that they could talk about to others or recall when they're making decisions about whether to be a continued customers of ours or expand into our other offerings and so forth. So probably one of the best ways to sort of articulate this memory bias is to watch just a minute and 45 of Dan Heath, who took this idea from Kahneman and really applied it to brands. So let's listen to Dan Heath talk about your experiences actually at Disney.
There's a puzzle about our memories of experiences. Let's call it the Disney paradox. And if you've been to one of the Disney theme parks, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If we were to sample your happiness level at, say, a couple of dozen different moments over the course of your park visit, my guess is that in a majority of those moments, you would actually be happier sitting on your couch at home. It's less humid there, less crowded. You can get a hot dog for less than $10. But as we reflect on our park visit, it might be one of the highlights of the year. Why is that? Well, psychologists know that our memories of our experiences are not really fair. We don't just take an average of our moment-by-moment sensations when we reflect on our experiences. Rather, we remember snippets, scenes, moments. And in particular, there are 2 moments that we disproportionately remember. The peak of the experience, which is either the best or the worst moment, and the ending. So when we look back on Disney, we tend to remember the roller coaster moments, the sweet family moments, the surprises, but we don't recall that moment-to-moment sweatiness and irritability. Now, when we talk about creating better experiences for the people we care about, whether that's our customers, our patients, our students, or our kids, what this means is that we're really talking about creating better moments. Great experiences hinge on peak moments. But there's a problem, because we're not trained to build peak moments. We're trained to fix problems.
And so I think you have a sense now for what this theory is saying, and to sort of summarize what it means for user experience design, or more broadly, customer experience design. It's saying that it's the peak and pit moments in the customer experience that defined the memory that people have for a brand. And designing peak moments is a practice that we need to add to removing those pit moments, right? And so put it in terms of Disney, right? Disney, in terms of how they design that customer experience, has realized they can't simply remove the sweatiness and irritability, the friction, as it were, of the experience of being at a Disney theme park. They realize that in addition to that, they have to devote themselves to creating those special moments, because those are the only ones that will be recalled later. And so this is the kind of shift in thinking that has to happen if you really want your UX and CX design to impact the brand. If you don't make this shift, you'll probably see what a lot of us see, which is brand metrics over time that are very flat, that don't really respond to the types of initiatives and experience that you're running in the marketplace. So just to really sum up the idea here is we must invest in both types of excellence, both the frictionlessly forgettable user experience, that is a form of excellence, and the delightfully indelible brand experience. So we started talking about this and socializing this idea at Microsoft. And just to give you a flavor of the types of new design thinking when you're designing for moments. For example, one coder who works on Teams, an engineer, Scott Hanselman, just designed a feature by which at the end of an everyday meeting at work, you could roll credits on the meeting. And it would just basically slot in there, oh, who was the director and who was the visual effects supervisor for this meeting. It's just a moment of delight, the kind of thing that would be remembered, maybe more so than things like, just eliminating the load time for sharing your screen, right? Other things that are just removing friction. Moments that are remembered, according to the Heaths, tend to tap into 4 kinds of emotion, and you're seeing them highlighted on this slide. Elevation is the one I just talked about, where you're surprising, or it's an elevated sensory moment, or pride, insight, and connection. And these are all very relevant to the work that we're doing and to the brand story we want to bring alive with teams. Moments of pride, we're doing that with, for example, bringing people together to watch an NBA game using Microsoft Teams, but the people that we're bringing there are ones who worked in the 2020 elections, those average unappreciated poll workers. We brought them to NBA games with NBA stars, President Barack Obama, and all on Microsoft Teams. This is the kind of thing that creates a moment of pride and definitely a brand memory. It doesn't always have to be that flashy. People realize when they use Teams that, oh, it's not just a meeting. I can share files. I can join a channel. I can have persistent chat. And when they have that aha, that's a moment of insight. That's the kind of thing that can define a brand in memory. And then lastly, just simply, going back to this feature of together mode, which is a really good example of designing for memory. It just makes people feel more connected. That, together mode, if you're not familiar with what it is, it uses mixed reality in order to put your video feed into an interesting background. It could be a stadium, could be a classroom, and everybody feels just a little bit more connected when they do that. So this is the type of thinking if you really are designing for moments. But as a market researcher, I needed to do something which is to devise a way to measure this. And so this brand memory battery is what we worked on through a couple of iterations. And essentially it starts by just asking people, what is your most vivid memory involving a given brand? Or, and again, that could be a product, that could be a company level brand, that could be a specific experience like, a webinar or a service experience. But the start of this is just to say, what do you remember? What sticks with you in the last 6 months, which has turned out to be a pretty good time frame? We then have people, once they talk about that memory, indicate whether it was positive or negative, and then indicate whether or not it influenced their view of the brand as a whole. And using those metrics, we're now able to kind of track if we're doing a good job with the brand memories. It was very gratifying and validating to have the Isomar recognize this with the Best Paper Award. And that's a white paper that I'd love to share with anyone. So for example, here is what you can do with answers to that question. And we have just a stacked bar graph that looks at the frequency distribution. And you'll notice that the most common thing people say when they're asked this question is, I don't really have a vivid memory, or my memory maybe would be neutral in some form. But what you really want to look for are the people who say, oh no, I have a very vivid memory. It's either positive or negative, and it does make me conclude something about the brand. And so once you're able to quantify this, then you're able to try some things, try some experiments, and see if these move. But the thing that we needed to do in order to recommend here at Microsoft that we really lean into something like this is do some validation research. And so what you're seeing now in the next couple of slides is, all right, we're going to isolate people based on whether or not they say, yes, I have a peak moment in my memory, or I have a pit moment in my memory, versus all the people who are somewhere in the middle with either no memory or something kind of neutral. And the first thing you find is that those who have a peak moment in memory are much, much higher in their brand love. For a lot of companies, just increasing that sort of that connection, that sense where people say, yeah, I love that brand, is a goal into itself. And these peak moments seem to be a way to get there. But we had the privilege through our data sets, our first party telemetrized data sets, to look at people who reported a peak or a pit moment. And then among our consumer businesses, for example, Office 365 or Xbox or use of Bing search or the Microsoft Store, we were able to examine how much people were spending on a monthly basis, depending on whether or not they reported having one of these peak moments or a pit moment. And it turns out that there was quite a bit of confirmation here too. People reporting a peak moment for the brand as a whole were spending 23% more than people who were reporting just a neutral memory, who in turn were spending 29% more than people who were reporting a real pit memory. So now we start to see the returns that might be realized if we invested in designing for moments and designing peak moments. When you really kind of look at the calculation on this, and this was inspired by something the Heath brothers did in their book, Power of Moments. We just heard from Dan Heath. There is a lot larger addressable opportunity in taking everyone who has a neutral brand memory and turning them into someone who has a peak moment in memory. In fact, there's 6x the addressable opportunity in terms of their increased spending doing that versus taking everyone who has a pit memory and getting them to a neutral state. And if you look at the bottom of the slide, it explains why there's just so much more upside for designing peak moments than eliminating all pit moments. And the reason is there's just a lot of people with a neutral memory. There's a lot of people, I love a term that Dan Heath uses, they are not overwhelmed, they are not underwhelmed, they are just whelmed. But those people are spending a lot less than those who are, overwhelmed in a delightful way by having a peak moment. So there is a big upside here, and if you have the right measurement mechanism, you can actually see the upside. Now, among you, I'm sure there's some rigorous analysts who are wondering, well, is that a correlation or is there a causal? Is there any evidence of causality here that a peak moment would increase spending? And we have looked at that data, and basically we look at it in a time series, where what we're doing in this slide is just tracking the month-over-month spending, once again, of our consumers in our consumer ecosystem. And we're basically looking at about when that moment occurred. We're looking at their spending before it and their spending after it. And really what happens is that before people have a peak or a pit moment, they're basically tied statistically month over month in how much they're spending. But once that differentiating moment occurs, then very reliably and at times somewhat dramatically, the people with peak moments are tending to spend more than the people with pit moments. Out at the end of this slide, what happens is when you get to a certain holiday spike, or it might be the COVID spike where everybody had to go, buy more laptops and office subscriptions so that they can stay productive and in school at home, then you see those with peak moments are more dramatic. Everybody spends more, but those with peak moments are spending a much increased amount. So peak and pit moments is absolutely a propensity to spend more. If you turn and look at more the commercial situation, which is, okay, I go to work, I'm told to use Teams or whatever it might be. I don't really choose, and I don't really adopt my apps myself. Peak and pit moments still matter for those folks. And they matter in the sense that after a peak or a pit moment happens, what you're seeing here is on Microsoft Teams, there will be created a reliable and statistically significant difference in how much they're using day by day. And so once again, you sort of see prior to that moment happening, people a little bit more braided. And after that, the peak moments are using the most, those neutral are using someone in between, and people who had a pit moment of some kind are using the least. And so this is sort of what is forming the core of the business case, that we do need to design for moments, and we do need to realize the gains that can be made from this. And if it's not in hardcore business metrics like spending or usage, it's in something that's still really important to Microsoft and every brand that wants to be a top global brand. It's important just for people feeling connected to our brand, feeling that real sense of love for it. So I'm happy to say that we've now been able to, in our tracker, run the brand memory battery a couple of iterations with a few months separated in between. And what we are seeing is that these metrics do move around, and you are able to see lift in these with some activities that go on. And so really a combination of together mode and also just the connection and the ability to continue with your business and to stay active and stay productive, even for small businesses to stay afloat, has raised those brand memories for teams. And so that's another thing that's really important for us measurement folks to know, is that this measurement is responsive. It's volatile. That means that it's going to change those proportions of peak and pit moments based on your activities. And so really what's going on at Microsoft, and of course, I've been, empowered to talk about externally, is, yeah, let's start doing this. Let's start thinking about, adding to our development, adding to our ideation, thinking about what is it that we're going to market with that will create a lasting memory. Removing friction, let me repeat once again, and filling potholes and getting rid of bugs, that can never stop. We must always do that. But the aha here is to say, well, if that is the sum total of your investment in engineering and design and marketing and customer experience writ large, then you're leaving a big opportunity on the table. So I'll just sort of end here, and we'll go to the Q&A, which is sort of, okay, what can I do about this? Well, once you're measuring your peak and pit moments, look at the data. Try to find out what are the peak and pit moments for your product versus your competitors' products. Obviously, you want to scale up those peak moments. How can we make them more common? And as I've been saying, you cannot ignore those pit moments. They're the ones you want to get rid of first. This is also a really great lens to evaluate your product roadmap. What is it that we're bringing to market here in the next 6 months or the next 12 months or 18 months? And let's go through those. Let's go through those innovations and sort of assess for ourselves which of those is most likely to create a memory. And the answer is those that are most likely to create an emotional reaction. And the EPIC framework and taxonomy that the Heath brothers talked about is very useful. And it's also very generative for new ideas. So look at your roadmap and say, are we creating moments of elevation or pride or insight or connection? And if there's nothing really in the next release set that's doing that, then what can we do to make sure that there is? And the last thing here to sort of end on is, once you start designing for moments, you really need to be creative and courageous. A lot of times you'll have designed one of these when you realize this is not something we had to do, but we're really glad we did it, like together mode in Teams, right? And so I want to end with what to me was a very inspiring and important insight from, once again, Dan Heath and Chip Heath in power of moments, which is, to create fans, you need the remarkable, and that requires peaks. But peaks don't emerge naturally. They must be built. So I hope you've enjoyed this new perspective and a little bit about how you would measure it and track it. And I really appreciate you joining this and sort of paying attention to these issues with me. I'm happy to go to a Q&A and let's see if we can answer as many questions as possible. Thank you very much.